Hello. Thank you for coming. Welcome to my home, and thank you for inviting me into yours. Excuse the massive alcohol collection behind me. Tonight, I want to invite you into my world. Welcome. Welcome especially if this is your first experience of celebrating Judaism. It's okay if you're feeling a little nervous. I know I am. I'm sure some of you are sat there thinking, religion and student theatre? What the hell have I got myself into? And I don't blame you. But I hope you're excited too. I've always loved Shabbat because it doesn't ask much of you. For my family and I, there's only one hard and fast rule, which is to get through the 3 prayers. Sometimes Shabbat is laying the table as quickly as you possibly can and then racing through the prayers because it's 9 p.m. and you haven't eaten dinner yet. And sometimes it's a perfectly set table and a lovingly prepared meal with family and friends to share it with. It can be a moment of quiet out of the chaos of a busy week, or the first time in months that you've remembered to celebrate and it feels like coming home. Shabbat is what you make of it. Tonight I'd like it to be an invitation. An invitation to light candles, drink wine, and eat bread with me. An invitation to share in my culture and my experiences. Perhaps most importantly, an invitation to reflect on your own rituals and beliefs, whatever they may be. I'm going to pause for a moment and give you a chance to set up your table, candles, wine, bread, if you've got them. Or if not, don't worry, just take this time to sit back and relax. Once you're set up, we're going to light the candles. Now traditionally, this is done by the matriarch of the household, but in this house we say, fuck gender roles, fire is for everyone. In a moment, I'm going to stand up, you light the candles, and I'm going to say a prayer. You're very welcome to join me in any and all of these activities, if you're comfortable, or just sit back and watch, if you're not. I'm now going to invite you to turn on your cameras, so we can share this moment together. Don't worry, they won't be on for long. I'm also going to send through the prayer, if you'd like to join that, but please do keep yourself muted, or we'll end up with complete chaos. Sending the prayer in Hebrew, transliteration, and English translation, so you can join however you're comfortable. Everyone ready? Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'hadlik ner Shabbat. Amen. Beautiful. You may now turn your cameras off. While we're sat here in this nice moment after the candles, I'm going to ask you to sit back, relax, maybe stare into the candles if you've got them, or close your eyes. I want to think about ritual for a moment. What does the word ritual mean to you? Perhaps you're thinking of something religious. Perhaps the word feels quite alien and you're thinking about someone else's idea of ritual. Try not to. Try to focus on your own idea of ritual. It could be anything. A cup of tea in your favourite mug before every exam. A family recipe you always prepare the same way. Do you have a particular drink or song that you like to listen to before going out? Try to pick one ritual and really focus in on it. Where does it come from? Why does it matter? I'll give you a moment to think, to fix that in your head, and I'll do the same. When I was 13, I had an annoying atheist phase. You know the kind I mean, full of arrogance and a complete straw man of religion based off of like evangelical Christians in America. The surely you don't actually believe that kind of atheist. And I'm still like that with some things. The other day my flatmate and I were watching this show. and one of the contestants made a comment about having seen a ghost, and I was like, alright, so we know that she's insane. And my flatmate looked at me really seriously, and she was like, ghosts exist. And I could not take her seriously. I still can't really, but I'm trying not to be a dick about it. I feel like I'm at the I don't understand, but I'm trying not to be a dick about it phase with a lot of religious beliefs, including my own. So I had this atheist phase, and during it my mum used to say to me, "You're a Jewish atheist." And I'd say to her, "God, Mum, stop trying to control me, religion is so oppressive." And it took me years to realise, and I don't say this often, that she was right. Nowadays I define myself as somewhere between Jewish and Jewish atheist, depending on the conversation and who I'm talking to. Which might seem like a bit of an oxymoron, but I think that actually the majority of atheists in this country are Christian atheists. They just don't know it. And if you think of yourself as an atheist, you might be sitting here thinking, but I've never been to church. My family's not religious. Of course I'm an atheist. But I expect that you still celebrate Christian holidays. Perhaps you make a point of always being home around Easter, or you love nothing more than when it hits December 1st and you can break out Christmas Spotify and open day 1 on the Advent calendar. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with that. But those aren't secular activities. A list of other non-secular activities includes assemblies with hymns or carols, nativity plays, Sunday roasts, chocolate eggs, and pretty much any events that take place in December. I'm being a bit facetious here, but I'm trying to build up a picture. I've been lucky in my life not to experience a lot of overt anti-Semitism, but what I have experienced in abundance is ignorance. I think there's a lack of education around Judaism and most other religions in our schools, and I think it's the kind of thing you don't really notice if it's not directly affecting you. Or maybe you do notice, but you don't see why it's a big deal. I have this very clear memory of when I was in primary 4, and we were having a fun lesson where you got to go on the computers, which is a big deal at the time, and write letters to Santa. I was 8 years old, and I had no interest in writing this letter. It was one of those things where it was pre-written, but then you had options to fill in with like a drop-down menu. So I chose the worst option for each one. And then at the end, there was this little box where you could write in anything else you wanted to say. And so I wrote something along the lines of, "P.S. Santa, I hate you. I wish you'd go away." My teacher was furious. She gave me a lecture in front of the whole class about how rude and inappropriate that was, how I needed to learn to respect other people's religions. And I wanted to say to her, how dare you say that to me when you've chosen an activity that excludes me? How dare you have the hypocrisy to lecture me about respect when my parents have to fight every year to get us taken out of Christian activities? When my holidays don't get a holiday, so I have to miss out on my education or miss out on my culture. What gives you the right to say that to me when you can't even be bothered to remember I exist? But I was 8 years old, so I didn't. Looking back on childhood experiences is an interesting thing, because for some of them you know as they're happening that you're going to remember them. Things like first kisses, first heartbreaks, the moment in a friendship when you know it's going to last a long time. That moment with my P4 teacher was one of those moments. I'm going to remember this for the rest of my life moment. I wish I'd said something. I've become very well versed in defending my religion, sometimes too much so. I can react too strongly to innocent comments, and in conversations about religion I'm often prepared for a fight. Some days I can't stand Christmas music or Christmas films because partaking in them feels like becoming complicit in my own erasure. And sometimes, when I think about Judaism, moments like those are the only ones that I can recall. Right. I don't know about you, but I could do it with a drink. And luckily for me, Jewish celebrations always involve alcohol. So, my dad used to say you could sum up any Jewish festival in 3 sentences. They tried to kill us, we survived, let's drink. Which doesn't quite apply to Shabbat unless you've had a particularly bad week. But whatever kind of week you've had, I'm sure you've earned a drink. So join me in pouring a glass of wine or whatever else you have to hand. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to turn on your cameras. Traditionally, you have to down whatever you drink in one, so don't pour too much. Alright, can everyone turn on their cameras? Sending the prayers through now, so feel free to join me if you like. Everyone ready? Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei pri hagafen. Amen. Excellent. You may now turn your cameras off. I'm going to ask you to think about childhood, so you might want to pour yourself another drink. I've talked about the childhood experiences that you remember with perfect clarity years later, the ones you know as they happen, that they're defining moments. But I want to think about the mundane things as well, the moments that only now, looking back, do you realise how important they were. What is it that makes you who you are? The pieces of yourself, the things you list when someone asks you to describe yourself. Where do those come from? If you're political, what sparked your interest in politics? If you're religious, why are you religious? Was there a point where it became an active choice rather than a passive one? Or vice versa? Is there a part of yourself that you used to take for granted, that now you've started to question? I'll give you a moment. Now that I'm on to my second drink, I have a confession to make. I don't really know how to talk about Judaism, which has made this an interesting performance to write. I have a lot to say in defense of my religion and my right to exist as a Jew. I have a lot of stories about people dismissing my Judaism and about how it's felt to grow up in a society with a dominant culture that differs from my own. I have a lot of opinions on Israel as an evil apartheid state and people who conflate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. And I have a lot of opinions on so-called anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. And for a while that's what I thought this piece was going to be about. And then I realised how negative all of these things are, how in response to something they are. And I realised that when it comes to talking about Judaism, I was at a loss. I didn't feel qualified to do it. Better to say nothing than to embarrass myself. I worried a lot when writing this piece about how it would be accessible to non-Jews, and then I worried some more about how it would be accessible to Jews who are more Jewish than me. For me, there's this really specific connection to Judaism and spirituality that I rather self-centeredly imagined nobody else could possibly understand. Which is kind of true in a way. I think it's kind of like colours, right? We all have these experiences that we put into certain categories. This is red, this is blue, this is what God, religion, and spirituality feel like to me. And we just kind of have to assume that other people are seeing what we see, because we put them into the same categories. I spent some time earlier this month annoying my parents, like I used to when I was a kid. Did you ever play the why game? It's very simple, it only has one rule. You ask someone a question, and no matter what they answer, you ask why, and so on and so forth. It used to drive my dad insane, so I thought, why not try that again? So I phoned up my parents, individually, they're not together, and I asked them why they were Jewish. And then I asked them why those things mattered, and why the things they thought mattered, and so on. And by the end of it, I realized that perhaps my inability to explain why Judaism is important to me is genetic. Don't get me wrong, they had a lot of interesting answers, but none of it felt like it was what I was looking for. So then I asked myself what I was looking for, and why I was looking for it, and why I was looking for what I was looking for, and so on. And by the end of that, I realized that maybe I did have the answers I wanted. There's something my mum said to me that really stuck out. We were about an hour and 10 minutes into a conversation that was an hour and 20 minutes long. And she was getting quite frustrated with me because I wouldn't stop asking why. I should probably explain before I go further that both my parents are Jewish, but my dad was born Jewish and my mum converted, which can sometimes lead people to believe that my dad's the really Jewish one and mum converted for him, when if anything, it's the other way around. So anyways, during this whole conversation, my whole question was, why did you convert? And she was saying a lot of interesting things, but it all felt to me like she was sort of sidestepping what I was asking. And eventually she said to me, and she'll be annoyed that this is the bit I'm using, because she said so many intelligent things and this is what I kind of pushed out of her. She said to me that she was interested in Judaism because of the way it stretched back across thousands of years, all connected to this one text that linked through generations. She said that thinking about that, thinking about being a part of that, gave her the same feeling that you might get looking up at a sky full of stars or a stormy sea. That it wasn't supernatural, but it didn't have to be. For my dad, it's different. Dad was born Jewish and he was raised Jewish, but only just. They did Hanukkah and Passover, and not much else, and he had a kind of half bar mitzvah. So when Dad grew up and left home, he didn't have many rituals to take with him, and he often struggled with whether or not Judaism was his to claim. My aunt married into Christianity, and so when my grandmother died long before I was born, she had a Christian funeral. And for my dad, that was the moment that he chose to be Jewish, or perhaps he realized he was Jewish in a way that he hadn't before, because a Christian funeral felt wrong and Judaism felt right. My whole life I've struggled with how I was Jewish. Was I being Jewish wrong? Was I Jewish enough? I always thought that belief had to be based in something really firm, something like, I absolutely and unequivocally believe in God, or I should follow every single rule in this book right here. I know exactly what this is and where it comes from sort of thing. When I was 18, I moved out of my mum's and in with my boyfriend at the time. And I missed my mum. I didn't want to admit that to her. So I started going home each week for Shabbat. And then, if our schedules didn't line up, I started doing it by myself, hosting my own events, starting my own traditions. For Pesach, my friend and I would cook food all day, and then my mum and I would argue about putting together a seder from different Haggadahs. And for the first time in my life, I felt able to really take ownership over celebrating Judaism and not just defending it. I'm going to ask you to think about things one last time, and this time our topic is spirituality. What do you believe? What don't you believe? What is it that fills you with awe? Is there something in the universe that you don't understand? Is there something you used to feel certain about that now you don't? I'll give you a moment to think, or just to appreciate the momentary absence of my voice. I'm going to ask you to turn on your cameras right now, just for one last time. We've not quite reached the challah, the bread, but I'd like to do this last bit together. I'll send through the prayer now so everyone has it ready for later on. I asked my parents why they chose to raise my brother and I the way they did. For my dad, it was simple. He wanted us to be able to claim Judaism, to have that connection to our past and to our present, if we wanted it. For my mum, it was a little more complicated. She wanted us to be able to have a nuanced approach to religion, a sort of post-religious approach to religion, if you will. She wanted us to be able to embrace multiplicities and contradictions and still be able to find something of value in Judaism, even if we weren't quite sure what it was. And it's so bizarre, after so many years of feeling inadequate with my religious observance, to realize that I got from my upbringing exactly what my parents wanted. That I don't have to know exactly what I believe or where it comes from to place value in it. I'm coming to realize more and more that nobody really understands belief or religion, that most people feel as insecure and unsure as I do, and that most importantly that that's not a reason to talk about, not to talk about it. I've asked you to think about ritual, informative experience, and spirituality, and I'd like to share some of my thoughts with you, because for me all of those things come back to Shabbat. I don't know what spirituality means to me. I'm not a particularly spiritual person, I don't think. But there's a moment when I say prayers that feels peaceful, it feels right. I think part of it stems from my upbringing, from so many Friday nights repeating the same words and the same actions. I think I don't have one formative experience with Shabbat. I have hundreds. For me, Judaism is a mix of a link between my past and my family's past, and a very simple pleasure I get from celebrating in the present. And for once that feels like enough. It doesn't feel inadequate right now. I'm going to ask you to join me for a final prayer. If you've got bread, this is the moment to take it, hold it up. If you've got the prayer in front of you. Everyone ready? Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen. Thank you so much for joining me. That's me officially finished. I am going to be sticking around on this call for a bit longer, so if you'd like to hang back, have a drink and a chat, then I'd really love to see you. I'm going to pop through to the kitchen to grab some more wine. So if you're going to go, there's no pressure to stay, but I'll say goodbye now. Goodbye, and thank you so much for coming. For those of you who'd like to stay on for a little bit longer, you can now unmute yourselves and start chatting. I'll be back in a moment.